So I want you to picture a giant asteroid, like roughly 200 kilometers across.
Right, just a massive rock.
Yeah, exactly. Just floating out there in the cold vacuum of space, somewhere between Mars and Jupiter. And it looks, completely ordinary, just a standard cratered rock.
But it's really not.
No,
Yeah.
it's really not. Because if you were to somehow drag that rock back to Earth, it contains enough iron, nickel, and precious metals to completely collapse the global commodities market overnight.
Overnight, just boom.
Right. We are talking about a single celestial body possessing more mineral wealth than humanity has generated in its entire history.
It's a staggering thought.
It is. And meanwhile, back here on Earth, there are companies brewing the molecular essence of meat in steel vats.
Using genetically modified yeast, yeah.
Right. Completely removing the cow from the equation. And out in the deserts, you've got these solar arrays capturing sunlight with such staggering efficiency that energy is basically on the verge of becoming too cheap to even meter.
Which sounds like pure science fiction.
It does. But we are genuinely standing on the precipice of this reality. A world of total abundance where human labor, the thing most of us spend our entire lives doing, could become, well, entirely optional.
Yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack this incredibly provocative thesis. It's a concept called Fully Automated Luxury Communism, or FALC.
Which is a very loaded title.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's basically a manifesto that argues that technology for a utopian post-scarcity future is already here.
Yeah.
But our economic operating system is just fundamentally broken. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and before we really get into the mechanics of, asteroid mining and lab-grown meat and all that, we really need to establish a very clear framework for our discussion today.
That's a good point.
Because the source text we are analyzing, written by Bastani, is deeply immersed in some highly charged political realities.
Yeah, Aunt Gubbly doesn't pull any punches.
No, it doesn't. It offers a very systemic, uncompromising critique of global market capitalism, and it name-checks contemporary political figures from across the whole ideological spectrum.
I mean, everyone from Donald Trump to Jeremy Corbyn gets mentioned.
Exactly. So it is crucial to state right at the top, to you listening, that our purpose in this deep dive is not to endorse the author's political viewpoints.
Right. We aren't taking sides here.
Not at all. Our objective is purely analytical. We are just going to impartially break down the technological arguments, decode the economic theories, and convey these concepts exactly as the author presents them in the text.
That is a very important boundary to set. We're really just your guides to the material, helping you map out the arguments being made.
Exactly.
And so the baseline argument starts from a place that feels incredibly familiar to a lot of people right now, which is this pervasive sense of gloom.
The gloomy present. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
There's this term the author borrows from a cultural theorist named Mark Fisher. It's called capitalist realism.
And there's a great quote that sums that up perfectly.
Oh, the end of the world one.
Yeah. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Which is so bleak. But what does that actually mean in practice? Like, psychologically?
Well, it speaks to a profound psychological block that kind of defines modern society.
Yeah.
Capitalist realism is this premise that market capitalism has transcended being just an economic system.
Like it's not just a choice anymore.
Right, because throughout history, human beings lived under feudalism or mercantilism or, imperial decree, and they understood those as systems that were created by humans.
So they could be changed by humans.
Exactly. But capitalist realism is the idea that the current market system is simply reality. Like, it operates like the weather.
Or the laws of physics.
Yes, it's unalterable. And if you subconsciously believe the system can never fundamentally change, it traps you in this totally anti-utopian thinking.
So when you look at the massive problems facing the globe today, you can't imagine a better world on the other side.
You can only imagine our current world collapsing.
Wow. Which totally explains why all of our pop culture is so obsessed with dystopia right now.
Oh, 100%.
The book actually brings up the movie Children of Men as the ultimate embodiment of this mindset. Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant example.
Right. In that film, the world is ending, people are infertile, there is mass violence, but it doesn't look like some cool alien wasteland.
No, it just looks like a grubbier, dirtier version of London.
Exactly. There are internment camps, but there are also like franchise coffee shops right down the street.
Yeah.
It's this flat, depressing reality where everyone just accepts that things are horrific, but we still have to wake up, go to work, and buy lattes. We are basically conditioned to be grateful because at least it's not the Dark Ages.
That's it, exactly. But the core argument of the book is that this passive acceptance is currently collapsing under the weight of 5 very real overlapping crises.
Okay, so what are these 5 crises?
Yeah.
Because they aren't just theoretical
You're right.
problems, right?
No, the text argues these are structural failures undermining the very foundation of the system. First, there is the climate crisis.
Which obviously threatens the biosphere's ability to just sustain complex human civilization.
Right. Second is resource scarcity. We are running through the Earth's easily accessible reserves of energy, rare earth minerals, and fresh water at a totally unsustainable rate.
It's like we're draining the battery.
Essentially, yeah. Third is societal aging. Life expectancies are generally high, but birth rates in the industrialized world are plummeting.
Which completely breaks the demographic pyramid that consumer capitalism relies on, right? Like,
Yeah.
you need continuous growth.
Exactly. You need young people buying things and paying into the system. Fourth, there is the rapid expansion of the global poor. The text refers to this massive demographic as the unnecessariat.
The unnecessariat, that is a rush word.
It is. It refers to people who are completely locked out of the formal economy. And fifth, which we will spend a significant amount of time unpacking today, is technological unemployment.
And robots taking the jobs.
Well, yes, but it's the impending reality of artificial intelligence and robotics replacing not just physical human labor, but cognitive labor as well.
Right, and the text points to a very specific moment when this illusion of stability really shattered for everybody.
The 2008 financial crash.
Yes, because if you think back to the 1990s, there was this overwhelming optimism. Francis Fukuyama wrote that famous book, The End of History.
Pushing this idea that liberal democracy and free market capitalism had won the Cold War.
Right, and that humanity had basically reached its final perfected form. There was nowhere else to evolve.
But 2008 proved that history was not over at all.
Not even close. The source material is full of statistics showing how the system has structurally failed the majority of people since then. Like before the 2008 crash, around 26 million people in the U.S. were using food stamps.
Which is already a lot.
It is. But afterward, that number skyrocketed to 46 million. And instead of recovering when the market recovered, it just stayed there.
Yeah, and you see the exact same structural decay in the UK. The text highlights the Trussell Trust, which is the largest network of food banks in the UK.
What happened there?
Well, in 2010, they distributed roughly 41,000 emergency food packs. By 2017, that number had exploded to 1.2 million.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Real wages in Britain dropped by more than 10% post-2008. We are witnessing this historic structural shift where having a job no longer acts as a shield against poverty.
That's the scariest part.
It really is. By mid-2017, 60% of people living in relative poverty in the UK actually lived in a household where someone was employed.
So the central promise of the late 20th century, this idea that increased productivity would eventually lift everyone's standard of living, has just demonstrably failed.
According to the text, yes.
Okay, I hear that, but let me play devil's advocate for a moment.
Sure, go for it.
If you zoom out and look at the last 200 years,
Yeah.
capitalism has survived massive shocks. I mean, it survived the Great Depression. It survived 2 world wars, the oil shocks of the 1970s. It always seems to find a patch or, a fix for whatever bug is crashing the system.
Right.
So why is the author so convinced that this time is fundamentally different? Like, are we just hitting a particularly deep pothole right now, or have we actually run out of road?
It is a critical distinction to make, and to answer it, we have to look at how capital has historically saved itself. It generally relies on 2 types of fixes.
Okay.
The first is what's called the spatial fix. If labor becomes too expensive or too organized in one place, you simply pack up the factory and move it to a country where labor is cheaper and regulations are looser.
Right, like we saw with manufacturing leaving the U.S. and Europe for Southeast Asia.
Exactly. The second is the technological fix, where you just invent a new machine to speed up production and lower costs.
So why don't those work anymore?
The author argues these traditional fixes are failing because the 5 crises we discussed represent absolute planetary boundaries.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, you cannot use a spatial fix to escape global climate change. There is no other planet to move the factory to.
Right.
And as we'll explore, the technological fix is accelerating so fast that it is rendering the human consumer completely obsolete. These aren't just cyclical dips in the market.
They're terminal contradictions.
Exactly. Within an economic operating system built for infinite growth on a finite planet.
Okay, so to truly grasp why this era is different, The source material introduces this really fascinating historical framework. It categorizes human history into these massive civilization-altering shifts called disruptions.
Yes, and understanding the scale of these disruptions is essential to the book's whole thesis. The first disruption occurred approximately 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution.
Before that, we were just hunter-gatherers.
Right, we were entirely dependent on the spontaneous whims of nature. We moved constantly to find calories. But agriculture was the moment humanity mastered biological information.
We figured out how to domesticate plants and animals.
Exactly. We reprogrammed nature to create a localized, predictable surplus of energy. And by energy, I mean food.
And that surplus changed the entire trajectory of our species. Because, if you didn't have to spend every waking moment hunting, you could stay in one place.
Yep.
And that surplus allowed for settled societies, which led to cities, centralized administration, written language, and, specialized classes of artisans and scholars.
It ended prehistory.
Right. But what's wild to me is that once that disruption happened, the underlying mechanics of human life stayed relatively static for thousands of years.
It really did.
The book points out that the energy available to a farmer in ancient Mesopotamia was functionally identical to the energy available to a farmer in 17th century Europe.
Yeah, it was all muscle, water, wind, and animal power. That paradigm remained locked until roughly 250 years ago, which brought the second disruption.
The Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. This was a profound shift in energy capture. Humanity figured out how to harness the ancient compressed solar energy stored in fossil fuels, coal, and later oil and gas.
We replaced human and animal muscle with the steam engine and the combustion engine.
And this energy density allowed for the creation of the factory system, global railways, the telegraph, mass production.
It created a level of material abundance that was previously unimaginable.
But it also cemented the wage labor system, where human time became a commodity to be bought and sold in a market.
Right, which brings up a brilliant analogy from the text that perfectly illustrates where we are right now. I read this and it just clicked for me.
Oh, the peak horse analogy.
Yes, the concept of peak horse. So think about the year 1915 in the United States. Henry Ford is rolling Model Ts off the assembly line.
Yep.
You would logically assume that the population of working horses was plummeting at that point.
Right.
Right. But it was the exact opposite.
Right. It was at an all-time high.
Exactly. In 1915, there were 26 million working horses in the U.S. That was the absolute peak of their population. They were pulling plows, hauling cargo in cities, working in mines.
They were employed in record numbers right at the precipice of the exact technology that was about to make their economic utility permanently obsolete.
The combustion engine didn't just take a percentage of equine jobs. It replaced the horse entirely as a source of motive power.
It is a really sobering historical parallel. The text actually cites Wassily Leontief, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who made this exact point back in 1983.
What did he say?
He theorized that human labor in the near future would follow the exact same trajectory as horses at the turn of the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah. Just as tractors and automobiles completely decoupled the necessity of equine muscle from economic production, computers and robotics will decouple human cognitive and physical functions from the economy.
So the uncomfortable question to ask yourself is, are we approaching peak human?
Are we the horses of 1915?
Exactly. We might be fully employed right now, working harder than ever, but are we standing on the edge of a technological cliff that renders our economic value zero?
Well, the author argues that the answer is undeniably yes. And this brings us to the core concept of the book, the third disruption.
Okay, let's get into this.
If the first disruption was agricultural surplus and the second was fossil fuel energy, the third disruption is driven by what the text calls extreme supply in information.
Information.
Right. It is an era defined by exponential technological trends. It's driven by the compounding processing power described by Moore's law and the plunging costs of technology driven by the experience curve.
So this is where we transition from machines just doing the heavy lifting to machines doing the heavy thinking.
Exactly.
AI is mastering complex tasks, renewable energy infrastructure is becoming incredibly cheap to produce, and we are quite literally viewing biology and human DNA as software that can be edited.
And the implication of this third disruption is what shatters the current economic model. It introduces the real possibility of post-scarcity.
Which is a huge word.
It is, because for all of recorded history, human economic systems, whether feudalism, socialism, or capitalism, have essentially been systems designed to manage and distribute scarcity.
Because there was never enough of everything for everyone.
Right. But market capitalism uniquely requires scarcity to function. You cannot generate a profit margin on something that is infinite and free.
You just can't.
So what happens to our global operating system when the fundamental building blocks of life, labor, energy, and resources become incredibly abundant?
That paradox is basically the engine of this entire discussion today.
Okay.
So let's start with the most immediate impact: labor.
Okay.
The text poses a deep economic question here. In classical economics, you have capital like the factory, the server farm, the tools, and you have labor, which is the human being operating them.
Right.
What happens when capital becomes labor?
It's a great question.
If a piece of capital, a robot or an AI, can perform the exact same task as a human, that boundary completely dissolves.
And the moment that boundary dissolves, the market value of human time collapses.
It has to.
The text provides incredibly stark examples of this happening right now. Take manufacturing. The Dutch technology giant Philips operates a plant in Drachten in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Instead of relying on human assembly lines, they use 128 advanced robotic arms.
Just robots doing everything.
Yeah. These machines are so hyper-efficient and fast that they actually have to be enclosed behind glass screens for safety.
Wow.
And they do the exact same work that requires hundreds of human workers at a sister plant in China.
So that completely neutralizes that old capitalist spatial fix you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. When robotic capital becomes cheap enough, a robot in a highly regulated European country is more cost-effective than an underpaid human in a developing nation.
But, the defense mechanism we always use to comfort ourselves is, sure, the robots will build the cars and assemble the electronics, but humans are creative.
Right. We have empathy.
Yeah, we will always do the cognitive work, the white-collar jobs. But the text aggressively dismantles that comfort zone.
It really does. Artificial intelligence isn't just coming for manual labor. It's coming for law, for accounting, for medical diagnostics.
The author brings up surgery, pointing to the Da Vinci surgical system. Right now, it's a tool that assists a human surgeon, right? It translates their hand movements into these hyper-precise robotic actions inside the patient.
Right.
But how does that evolve? As machine learning algorithms are fed millions of hours of surgical data, mapping every possible outcome and complication.
It is only a matter of time before the system can execute the surgery entirely autonomously.
Faster and safer than a human ever could.
Exactly. There is a quote in the text from Mark Cuban, the billionaire investor, who states that the world's first trillionaire will be the person who masters commercial artificial intelligence.
Trillionaire.
Yeah. And the reason for that valuation is precisely because AI will wipe out the highly paid, white-collar professional class.
It's just wild to think about.
The underlying mechanism is simple. Any job that can be reduced to a set of repetitive patterns or decisions can be mapped, modeled, and automated by software.
Whether that's moving pallets in a warehouse or reviewing 1,000-page legal discovery documents.
Precisely.
If you think about it logically, we should be throwing a global party. We've invented machines that can do all the tedious, back-breaking, and mind-numbing work for us.
We should be celebrating.
Right. But instead, everyone is terrified of losing their health care and ending up on the street.
Yeah.
To explain why we feel that way, the text dives into a brilliant historical debate between two massive economic figures, John Maynard Keynes and Karl Marx.
It is one of the most illuminating paradoxes in economic history. Let's look at Keynes first.
Yeah.
In 1930, right at the onset of the Great Depression, Keynes wrote a surprisingly optimistic essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren.
What did he argue?
He looked at the exponential trajectory of technological innovation and compound interest, and he predicted that within a century or so, roughly by 2030, the economic problem of survival would be solved.
He genuinely believed that productivity gains would be so massive that humans would only need to work about 15 hours a week.
Yeah. He thought our biggest societal crisis would be figuring out how to stave off boredom with all our new leisure time.
I mean, think about your own life for a second.
Yeah.
We have smartphones that are millions of times more powerful than the computers that guided the Apollo missions.
Oh, easily.
We have email, Slack, automation software. We are vastly more productive than a worker in 1930.
Vastly.
So where is our 15-hour work week? Why are we answering work messages from bed at 10 p.m.? The technology to free up our time is literally sitting in our pockets.
And this is exactly where the author brings in Karl Marx, specifically drawing on a very prescient, lesser-known section of his writing known as the Fragment on Machines.
Okay, so what did Marx see that Keynes missed?
Well, Marx actually agreed with Keynes on the trajectory of technology. He recognized that capitalism is an unparalleled engine for innovation and creating labor-saving machinery.
Right.
But Marx understood a fatal flaw. Under a capitalist system, those technological efficiency gains do not belong to the worker.
They belong to the owner of the capital.
Exactly, because the system is driven entirely by the need to extract profit.
So the mechanism works like,
Yeah.
if a new machine allows a worker to produce 10 times as many goods in an hour, the capitalist doesn't say, great, you can go home 9 hours early and I'll pay you the same.
Right, they don't say that.
The capitalist fires 9 workers, keeps one, and forces that one to work the full day, producing vastly more output for the same wage.
Exactly. The machinery reduces the necessary human labor required to make a product to a minimum, but only to maximize the amount of surplus value the owner can extract.
So the technology exists to liberate the worker, but the economic framework weaponizes that technology to exploit them further.
That's the paradox.
So we have the engine for a utopia, but we are running it on an operating system designed for exploitation. It's a massive contradiction.
It is.
And this exact dynamic applies not just to how we work, but to how we power our civilization. Let's look at energy.
Okay, let's transition to that.
There is a statistic in the source material that is genuinely staggering. In a single 90-minute window, enough potential solar energy hits the surface of the Earth to meet the entire energy demand of the global population for an entire year.
90 minutes.
90 minutes. That just blew my mind.
It forces a complete perspective shift. We are functionally orbiting in an unimaginably massive, free nuclear fusion reactor,
The sun.
the sun. The text argues that the third disruption involves a profound transition in how we harvest power.
Right.
During the second disruption, we relied on ancient subterranean solar energy fossil fuels.
Which are scarce, dirty, and require immense geopolitical violence to secure.
Exactly. The third disruption is about capturing the ambient abundance of the sun directly. And the catalyst making this possible isn't just scientific discovery, it is an economic phenomenon known as the experience curve.
I'm glad you brought that up because it's really important to differentiate the experience curve from Moore's law.
Yeah, they are different.
Moore's law is about the density of transistors on a microchip doubling every 2 years. But the experience curve, which I think is also known as Wright's law, right?
Yes, Wright's law.
It's about manufacturing. It observed that every time the cumulative global production of a manufactured good doubles, the cost to produce that good falls by a predictable percentage.
Usually around 20%.
Right. You just learn how to make it better, faster, and cheaper the more you do it.
Exactly. And the solar industry, along with lithium-ion battery manufacturing, has been riding a ruthless, exponential experience curve.
Give me an example.
Well, in the 1970s, photovoltaic cells were so prohibitively expensive, they were almost exclusively used to power satellites in orbit.
Because only NASA could afford them.
Right. But as production scaled up globally, driven heavily by state subsidies in places like China and Germany, the costs plummeted.
So it's not just a niche thing anymore.
Not at all. The text argues that we have crossed a tipping point. The transition to renewable energy is no longer just a moral imperative pushed by environmentalists. It is a brute force economic inevitability.
Simply put, extracting and burning ancient carbon sludge will soon be entirely unable to compete with the sheer cheapness of capturing infinite sunlight.
We are marching toward a paradigm of energy abundance.
But, and this is there's a massive physical catch here. You can't just plug a toaster into a sunbeam.
No, you cannot.
To capture, transmit, and store all that free solar energy, you need physical infrastructure. You need massive arrays of solar panels, wind turbines, and grid-scale batteries.
Yep.
And those things require earthly materials: copper, lithium, cobalt, rare earth metals. The text highlights a very real anxiety about peak copper or severe lithium bottlenecks.
Which is a huge problem.
We have an infinite power source in the sky, but we're living on a very finite rock. If we run out of the metals required to build the batteries, the whole post-scarcity transition just grinds to a halt.
Which brings us to a concept that sounds like pure science fiction, but is actively being heavily capitalized by major corporations as we speak.
Asteroid mining.
Asteroid mining. The text argues that to truly achieve post-scarcity, humanity must look beyond the physical limits of the Earth's crust.
Right.
The mineral resources waiting in near-Earth asteroids and the asteroid belt are almost mathematically incomprehensible.
Let's talk about the specific example the text uses, which is asteroid 16 Psyche.
Yes.
This is a real celestial body orbiting between Mars and Jupiter. It's roughly 200 kilometers in diameter. And based on spectrographic analysis, scientists believe this single asteroid is composed almost entirely of metallic iron, nickel, gold, and platinum.
It's essentially the exposed core of a dead planet.
Which is wild. How do you even put a price tag on a rock like that?
Well, the author notes that estimates for the value of just the iron content alone on 16 Psyche are around $10,000 quadrillion.
10,000 quadrillion. I don't even know how many zeros that is.
It's a completely absurd number. To put it into perspective, the entire annual gross domestic product of the global economy is roughly $80 to $100 trillion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A single asteroid holds more raw material wealth than human civilization has generated since the dawn of agriculture.
That is just, it's hard to wrap your head around. But evaluating the cost is one thing. Actually getting up there and mining it is another. How does the text explain the logistics of turning space into a mining colony?
The enabler here is what's called Space Race 2.0, and it's driven by the plunging costs of orbital launch.
Okay.
For the first 60 years of the space age, access to orbit was the exclusive domain of massive nation-states utilizing extremely expensive single-use rockets.
You fly it once, and then millions of dollars of hardware just burn up in the atmosphere or crash into the ocean.
Exactly. But the text points out that private entities, specifically SpaceX, have completely disrupted this model with reusability.
Right, landing the boosters.
Yeah. By developing systems like the Falcon Heavy and the upcoming Starship architecture, where the booster rockets fly back to the launch pad and land vertically, the cost per kilogram of getting payload into orbit is collapsing exponentially.
It fundamentally changes the math. And it's not just about launching mining equipment from Earth. The source material talks about companies like Moon Express and Planetary Resources.
Right.
Their initial business model isn't even to bring platinum back to Earth. Their goal is to mine water.
Water in space.
Yeah. They want to identify ice deposits on the moon and on near-Earth asteroids, use solar power to electrolyze that water into hydrogen and oxygen, and use it as rocket propellant.
They are essentially trying to build a network of gas stations across the inner solar system.
Because once you can refuel your spacecraft in zero gravity, without having to fight Earth's massive gravity well every time.
The energy cost of maneuvering to capture an asteroid drops to almost nothing.
It's genius. But this brings us right back to the central economic paradox we discussed with labor earlier.
Okay, lay it out.
Let's say a private space consortium successfully maneuvers a near-Earth asteroid into lunar orbit. They begin extracting the ore and safely drop $1 quadrillion worth of iron and platinum back down to Earth.
Okay.
Doesn't the very act of introducing that much extreme supply instantly destroy the market? If platinum becomes as common as aluminum, the price drops to zero. You can't make a profit.
You have identified the fatal contradiction of capitalism in an era of extreme supply.
Right.
The capitalist price mechanism breaks down when scarcity is removed. So what is the logical response of a profit-driven entity?
I mean, they wouldn't want the price to drop.
No, they wouldn't. The text argues that to maintain their profit margins and justify the capital expenditure, these space mining monopolies will be forced to artificially restrict the supply.
Really?
Yes. They will hoard the resources off-world. They might initially flood the market just enough to bankrupt all terrestrial mining operations and then establish a total monopoly.
And then just strictly meter out the metals to keep prices artificially high.
Exactly. They will manufacture scarcity where none naturally exists.
That's the ultimate form of gatekeeping. It's like finding a magical oasis in the middle of a desert that produces unlimited water. But instead of letting people drink, a corporation builds a wall around it and sells it by the drop, just to keep the price up.
That is the perfect analogy. And this is exactly why the text frames space exploration as an urgent political battleground, focusing heavily on international law.
Oh, interesting.
It points to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which was a document forged at the height of the Cold War.
What does it say?
That treaty explicitly states that the exploration of space is the province of all mankind, and it strictly forbids any nation from appropriating celestial bodies. The author argues that this principle of a universal public commons must be fiercely defended.
Because the opposing framework is already being built. The text contrasts that 1967 treaty with the 2015 U.S. Space Act.
Signed into law under the Obama administration.
Right. And that legislation legally recognized the right of American private citizens and corporations to engage in the commercial extraction and ownership of space resources.
It was basically the firing of the starting pistol for the privatization of the cosmos.
And the author makes the crucial point. that these private billionaires didn't invent space travel in a vacuum.
No pun intended.
Huh, right. The foundational science, the rocketry, the orbital mechanics, they're all funded by decades of public tax dollars channeled through NASA.
The public paid for the research, but private capital is maneuvering to capture the infinite wealth.
It's frustrating to think about. And this transition from inherent scarcity to extreme supply doesn't just apply to cosmic metals or electricity. It applies to the most intimate requirement for human survival.
Our food.
Yes. The text transitions from the vastness of the solar system down to the cellular level to tackle the looming crisis of global sustenance. And it takes direct aim at the profound inefficiency of the meat industry.
The statistics the text provides on how we produce meat are just devastating.
They really are.
When you look at it purely as an energy transfer system, relying on livestock to convert solar energy into human calories is completely irrational.
How so?
The text notes that nearly a third of the planet's ice-free usable surface is dedicated to livestock, either directly for grazing or indirectly to grow the massive amounts of soy and corn required to feed them.
A third of the planet.
Yeah. And producing a single pound of beef requires upwards of 440 gallons of water. It is an ecological catastrophe.
Particularly when you factor in a global population approaching 10 billion people who all increasingly want a Western meat-heavy diet.
Exactly. To understand the solution, we have to look back at the historical context again. For the first disruption, the dawn of agriculture allowed humans to manipulate biology through selective breeding. Over thousands of years, we bred cows to be fatter and wheat to yield more grain.
Right.
But we are still reliant on the entire biological system of an animal, a sentient creature that needs to breathe, walk, grow bones, and produce waste just to harvest a specific muscle protein.
It's incredibly inefficient.
It is. The third disruption solution is a field called cellular agriculture. The text frames this as post-scarcity and sustenance. It treats biology not as a mysterious life force, but as editable informational code.
And this is where we get into the infamous $325,000 hamburger.
Yes, Mark Post's burger.
The text highlights his work. He's a Dutch researcher. In 2013, he unveiled the world's first lab-grown burger. The mechanics of this are fascinating.
They really are.
They didn't grow a whole cow in a test tube. They took a small biopsy of stem cells from a living cow, placed those cells in a bioreactor, fed them a nutrient serum, and coaxed them into multiplying and forming actual muscle tissue.
And that project was bankrolled by Google co-founder Sergey Brin, which is why that single patty cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce.
But the author points right back to the exponential cost curve.
Yeah.
Just a few years later, companies were aggressively projecting the cost of a cultured meat burger to drop to parity with traditional beef.
Roughly $10 to $12.
The ecological implications of that cost curve are staggering.
Oh, massive. Cultured meat produced at scale in sterile bioreactors requires up to 99% less land and 96% less water than conventional livestock farming.
It practically eliminates the immense greenhouse gas emissions associated with cow digestion and manure.
It completely severs the link between human protein consumption and industrial animal slaughter. It would free up continent-sized tracts of land that could be rewilded to draw down carbon.
And cellular agriculture isn't just about cultivating animal stem cells. The text explores an entirely different avenue, creating the exact experience of meat using purely plant-based biology.
Impossible Foods.
Yes, it dives into the methodology of Impossible Foods. They didn't use cow cells at all. Instead, they looked at the molecular structure of meat to understand what makes it taste, smell, and bleed the way it does.
And they found it.
They identified a molecule called heme. They took the specific DNA sequence that codes for heme, inserted that genetic information into yeast, and then fermented it in giant vats, similar to brewing beer.
They literally genetically modified yeast to mass produce the chemical essence of meat.
And then blended it with plant proteins. It is the ultimate manifestation of food becoming an informational good.
Once you sequence the DNA, the biological output can be infinitely replicated via fermentation, and this methodology is rapidly expanding.
Like dairy, right?
Yeah, the text mentions companies like Perfect Day, who have inserted the genetic sequence for whey and casein proteins into microflora to produce actual dairy, milk-real cow's milk without ever involving a cow.
Clara Foods is doing the exact same thing to produce synthetic egg whites.
There is even a startup mentioned called Endless West that analyzes the precise molecular and chemical profile of a rare, decades-old whiskey and then simply combines those molecules in a lab to recreate the exact flavor profile overnight.
That is crazy. It completely upends the entire agricultural paradigm we've relied on for 12,000 years. But this informational approach to biology doesn't stop at what we eat. It extends to our own bodies.
Human health.
Exactly. The text touches on the revolution of CRISPR gene editing. Just as scientists can edit yeast to produce hema, we now possess the molecular scissors to precisely edit human and animal DNA.
And here, the text uses a very specific anecdote to illustrate the friction this creates in society. It tells the story of a biohacker named David Ishii.
Tell me about him.
Well, Ishii wasn't working in some billion-dollar corporate pharmaceutical lab or a university. He was a dog breeder operating out of a shed in Mississippi.
Shed.
Literally a shed. He wanted to use CRISPR technology to edit the genome of Dalmatians to eliminate a hereditary genetic mutation that causes them to suffer from hyperuricemia or gout.
But as soon as he tried to implement this, he ran headfirst into regulatory pushback from the FDA.
The government stepped in and basically said, hold on, you can't just casually rewrite animal DNA in your backyard shed.
Which, from a safety perspective makes sense. But what is the broader point the author is making with that story?
The author uses Ishii to highlight a profound tension inherent in the third disruption. The tools required to engineer biology, CRISPR kits, synthetic DNA, lab equipment are becoming incredibly cheap and democratized.
This is classic extreme supply.
Exactly. But the state, which is often structured to protect legacy corporate interests or navigate slow-moving safety frameworks, instinctively steps in to regulate, restrict, and control access.
It is the friction between grassroots, DIY technological abundance, and top-down institutional control.
If human health and genetic therapy become cheap, accessible informational goods, the global pharmaceutical industry stands to lose hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue.
So the natural impulse of market capitalism will be to utilize patent law, strict regulation, and monopolies to enforce artificial scarcity on life-saving biological tools.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together, because we have mapped out a truly staggering technological landscape here.
We have
robotic automation capable of replacing human, physical, and cognitive labor. We have the infrastructure to capture practically infinite solar energy.
We have the rocketry to access the unimaginable mineral wealth of the solar system.
We have the biological tools to grow abundant, cruelty-free food in bioreactors and edit genetic diseases out of existence.
The technological blueprints for a utopian society of total abundance are literally sitting on our desks right now.
So why does looking at the news every morning feel so dystopian? This brings us to the core political project of the book. How do we actually make fully automated luxury communism a reality?
The entire synthesis of the text is that technology, no matter how advanced, will not automatically save us.
Right.
The underlying economic system is completely misaligned with our technological reality. If the marginal cost of everything, human labor, energy, resources, food, is trending towards zero, market capitalism will destroy itself unless it violently imposes artificial scarcity.
And to prove this isn't just some radical left-wing theory, the text cites a remarkable paper written in 2001 by Lawrence Summers.
Larry Summers.
Yeah. He is a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, a former president of Harvard, and essentially a high priest of the neoliberal capitalist establishment.
What did he write?
Well, in this paper, Summers explicitly argues that for information goods to remain profitable in a digital economy, the natural tendency toward free distribution must be stopped. He states that exclusion and monopolies must be legally enforced.
He essentially said the quiet part out loud.
He really did. He admitted that for the capitalist machine to keep generating profit for shareholders, we have to legally restrict people from accessing things that cost nothing to replicate. We have to force things to be scarce on purpose, even if it hurts people.
Precisely. And the political project of fully automated luxury communism is the direct response to that dynamic.
Okay, so what's the plan?
It argues that instead of allowing a tiny fraction of billionaires to hoard the abundance generated by the third disruption and enforce artificial scarcity on the rest of us, we must politically reorganize society to distribute that extreme supply to everyone.
And the author playfully frames this project as luxury populism.
It's a great phrase.
It is. The text describes it as a red and green project. It's green because it absolutely accepts the existential threat of climate change and the absolute necessity of rapidly transitioning away from fossil fuels.
But it's red because it completely rejects the traditional, often moralistic environmentalist narrative that demands austerity.
You know the narrative I'm talking about. Turn down your thermostat, stop flying on airplanes, eat bugs, shrink your life, and embrace suffering to save the planet.
Right, the FALC project says no to that.
It promises abundance. It argues that because renewable energy and automation are so hyper-efficient, we can all have beautiful lives, enjoy high-quality lab-grown food, travel, and permanently eliminate the drudgery of the 40-hour workweek, all while completely decarbonizing the economy.
To achieve this transition, the text proposes specific radical policy shifts, and it makes a very sharp distinction between a popular current idea, universal basic income, or UBI and its own proposal.
Which is Universal Basic Services, or UBS.
Exactly. A lot of tech billionaires advocate for UBI.
Right, the idea of giving every citizen $1,000 a month to survive as AI takes all the jobs.
But the text argues that UBI, implemented within a capitalist framework, is a trap.
Really? Why?
If you give everyone cash, but the fundamental necessities of life, housing, healthcare, transit are still controlled by speculative, profit-driven markets, the landlords and health insurance companies will simply raise their prices to absorb the new baseline of cash.
It just subsidizes a broken extractive system.
Yeah.
It's like trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it just drains out to the people who own the bucket.
That's exactly it. So instead, the text advocates for universal basic services.
Meaning the state physically guarantees the foundational elements of life?
Yes. Free high-quality public housing, free electrified public transit, free education at all levels, free preventative health care, and free universal access to information and broadband.
But wait, if I'm listening to this, the immediate historical comparison springs to mind. If the state is guaranteeing housing, food, and transport, does this just mean a return to the old Soviet Union?
That is the most obvious critique, for sure.
Are we just talking about a giant, suffocating central bureaucracy where the government owns everything but with, like, better Wi-Fi and lab-grown meat?
The text addresses this head-on. The author insists this is not a return to 20th century state socialism.
Okay, what's the difference?
The crucial difference is the technological base. The Soviet Union was built during the Second Disruption. It was an attempt to manage severe material scarcity using industrial manual labor.
They utilize top-down, brutal scientific management, measuring every swing of a hammer with a stopwatch to try and squeeze maximum productivity out of exhausted factory workers.
Right. FALC, conversely, is built entirely on the post-scarcity realities of the Third Disruption. You don't need a totalitarian bureaucracy to force people to work in the coal mines if robots are building the solar panels and AI is managing the grid.
So if it's not a giant central bureaucracy dictating everything, how does the text envision this actually working on a local level?
It advocates for a highly decentralized, localized approach. It introduces the concept of municipal protectionism.
What does that look like?
It points to working models where local city councils and regional governments intentionally use their massive public procurement budgets to buy goods and services exclusively from local worker-owned cooperatives rather than outsourcing to massive extractive multinational corporations.
It envisions a society where the necessary human labor that does remain is organized democratically by the workers themselves at the community level.
Yes.
And what about the massive macroeconomic level? How do we pay for the transition to these universal services and solar grids?
The text argues for a radical reorientation of central banking. Currently, central banks like the Federal Reserve create trillions of dollars through quantitative easing, primarily to buy financial assets and prop up the stock market, which overwhelmingly benefits the wealthy.
So they want to redirect that money printer.
Exactly. The author argues that this immense power of fiat currency creation should instead be directed toward funding the rapid global transition to renewable infrastructure and universal basic services.
Wow.
Furthermore, we must fundamentally abandon gross domestic product GDP as our metric for societal success.
Because if goods, like energy and digital services, are becoming virtually free due to extreme supply, traditional GDP will actually shrink.
Right, making it appear as though the economy is failing. The text proposes replacing GDP with an abundance index.
An abundance index, I like that.
It's a metric that actually measures human flourishing, tracking the reduction in carbon emissions, the increase in average leisure time, and self-reported human happiness.
That is just... It's a completely different way of looking at the world. Let's pull back and synthesize this incredible journey we've just been on.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
The core message of the source material is that we are currently living through the incredibly painful, chaotic birth pangs of the Third Disruption.
The transition period.
Right. The actual technology required to construct a genuine utopian future already exists. We have the blueprints for free, infinite solar energy. We have the rocketry to access limitless mineral wealth from the stars. We have the biological tools to create abundant, cruelty-free food.
And we have the automation to finally liberate humanity from the back-breaking, mind-numbing labor of daily survival.
The only thing, literally the only thing preventing this reality is a social and economic operating system that was built for a bygone era.
We're desperately trying to run post-scarcity software on scarcity hardware.
And the system is crashing all around us. So what does this all mean?
Well, this leads to a final, profound philosophical realization about the nature of human freedom itself.
Okay.
The text argues that under our current capitalist system, true individualism is functionally impossible for the vast majority of the population.
Because people are forced to sell their time and labor simply to afford the right to survive.
Exactly. Their lives, their geography, and their ambitions are entirely dictated by the coercive demands of the labor market. True freedom begins where the realm of necessity ends.
So we leave you with this final thought to ponder as you go about your day. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning in a world where the third disruption has been harnessed for the public good.
Just imagine it.
You wake up knowing that your housing, your food, your transportation, and your health care are permanently, irrevocably guaranteed.
Not by the meager, conditional charity of a state bureaucracy.
But by the immense automated technological wealth of our entire species. If you strip away the constant grinding anxiety of starvation, and if you remove the sheer exhaustion of the 40-hour work week hanging over your head, what would you actually choose to do with your life? Who would you finally have the freedom to become?